Hello everyone, this is part 2 of What If Naruto Was a Puppeteer, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Quite what Naruto had expected. It was very plain. Growing up in a city environment, with the hustle and bustle of daily life flowing around him, Naruto had always imagined the outside world to be this great, open, fresh new world. He had felt like Training Ground 44 was the first step in that direction. Now though, walking along the open dirt path in the direction of Nami no Kuni, he could only be disappointed by the plainness of it all. True, he had spotted a few plants he had never seen before and it had excited him for a while, but now he was just back to the monotony of walking along in silence. They were here because after about a month of pointless chores disguised as missions, and what their esteemed sensei dictated as training, Kakashi had finally deigned to give the group a C rank. It was a hesitant decision as well, but not one that he could argue with. After all, the man seemed to value teamwork above all else, and while Naruto couldn't say what Team 7 had was true teamwork, they could certainly act as a cohesive unit when necessary. It had been when he first got into reading that Naruto realized that the characterization he saw applied in his action novels could very easily be translated over to real life. People had quirks and mannerisms that genuinely affected how they thought about things. They had traits that could be counted on to influence decisions or choices they made. All it took was a slight push in one direction or a tug in the other, and Naruto could subtly nudge people in the right way. Of course, this worked better on some than on others. For instance, Kakashi was a naturally cautious man who was very guarded about his own emotions. This made it very difficult to ascertain what traits he had to exploit and even more difficult to manipulate them at all. Likewise, the Hokage's every action and sentence was careful measured before he said or did anything, as was only proper of a shinobi that had reached his age. Fresh genin straight out of the academy on the other hand. That was child's play. Sasuke was simplicity itself to twist and turn any which way Naruto pleased. It was as if he could see the little blue threads into the boy's mind. Make anything a challenge or question the boy's abilities in an area and the young Uchiha would be on it faster than Tora on a ball of catnip laced with a sleeping drug, long story. Likewise, allow the boy to assume what he believed to be a leading role and he would cruise along a set direction without stopping until he either came across an obstacle or required more guidance. He was stubborn like that. Sakura was an even easier case. Convince her that it was all for the benefit of Sasuke, or her and Sasuke's future, or would help her get Sasuke to notice her, and she'd jump off a cliff. It was almost pitiable in a way, and for a long while Naruto had considered trying to guide her away from that path. Of course he didn't because it was too damn convenient this way, but that didn't mean he hadn't set up measures just in case. Sakura was now coming along quite promisingly in medical ninjutsu, or at least the bare basics of it. Really, show the girl some applicable use of her powerful mind, near-perfect chakra control and natural instinct to avoid conflict, and Naruto was surprised Kakashi hadn't already done it. Quite honestly, with chakra control that refined, Sakura could go on to do anything she pleased, from ninjutsu to genjutsu. It was her weak body and rather cowardly nature that left these paths fairly devoid of a hopeful future. It did help that every time Naruto gave a slight compliment on her progress, Sasuke would look over with that same bland look he always did. Of course Sakura would take this to mean that Sasuke was interested in what she was doing, which in turn would push her harder. This was good, as Naruto's own control, while refined, was not quite at the level of medical ninjutsu, although that was something to consider. However, the real story, that was obvious if you weren't obsessed with the boy, was that Sasuke was jealous. The Uchiha hated seeing people his own age surpass him at anything, even if it was something he himself had no interest in. It was the worst, but most exploitable form of a superiority complex. The most hilarious thing about it all though, Kakashi knew what he was doing. Oh, the Junin might not say anything directly beyond a disapproving look, but it was there, in his lazy half-lidded eye. Honestly, Naruto didn't understand his problem. Under normal circumstances, Team 7 would be a horrific mess of a team with two quiet loners that were powerful in their own ways and a love-struck fangirl with no mind of her own. If Kakashi wasn't going to take the initiative to mold them into a workable unit, Naruto just decided to take the reins from him. That didn't stop the silver-haired man from trying to undo all of Naruto's machinations, but the man just didn't have the heart to be that manipulative to his genin. He would offer a counter-argument or opinion to the two every now and then, but Sasuke's naturally stubborn nature and one-track mind always kept him on the first course set. Then, naturally, Sakura would follow him, likely into the very pits of Naraka, although the girl did have a rather large stubborn streak of her own. Naruto suspected it was from the constant praise she received in the academy. Obviously she wasn't used to people criticizing her, or second-guessing herself. Naruto simply shrugged to himself internally. Personally, he was rather fond of the arrangement. His plan to gain a good sensei hadn't really gone anywhere considering Kakashi's reluctance to teach them anything that seemed even remotely worthwhile. However, that just meant little had changed since the academy. Everything Naruto had learned about puppetry was self-taught, so why would his time as a genin be any different? And there, he came full circle in his thoughts back to disappointment. Is that kid okay? He's been pretty quiet. Tazuna, the old bridge builder they were assigned to escort back to his home nation, leaned across and whispered to Sakura in a tone he hoped the young blonde couldn't hear. He may have initially been skeptical about 3 kids guarding him, but he still didn't want to upset a shinobi. He'd heard stories. Plus there was this unsettling feeling radiating from the boy as he walked, as if everything going on around him was just background noise to a much greater picture only he could see. It was a hard feeling to describe, but every time those cold, sleep-deprived eyes passed over him, Tazuna felt a small shiver run the length of his spine. Oh, Naruto. He's just, well. Sakura blinked before frowning, looking across at the young blonde trailing behind them in the rear position, a few steps in front of Kakashi. Sasuke was taking point while Sakura walked next to the client. Kakashi had opted for a more lax formation due to the low level of the mission. Naruto's always like this. She rubbed the back of her head and smiled up at the old man in a way she hoped was cute. She was working on that smile for Sasuke after all. You get used to it. Tazuna nodded slowly, not entirely convinced as he felt Naruto's detached gaze slide right past him again. Sure. Well, you seem pretty level-headed at least. Be honest, are you guys powerful? Can you guys protect me? Sakura seemed ready to answer, no doubt lauding Sasuke as she had been for what seemed like the entire trip so far, before Kakashi butted in from the back. I've already assured you client-san, my genin can handle bandits and the like, and that's all we're likely to expect on a simple C rank. Sakura blinked before nodding happily. Bandits, she could deal with that. Just normal people without chakra, plus, Sasuke would be there to protect her. And with that the girl's gaze drifted off into her own fantasies, leaving a sighing Tazuna and an amused Kakashi looking on. The entire group were fairly lost in their own thoughts, save Kakashi who kept his single eye wandering around, so when they passed a suspiciously wet puddle in the middle of the path, only the silver-haired Cyclops noticed. That was why, when 2 figures melted out of their genjutsu and wrapped up Kakashi in a long chain composed entirely of shuriken strung together, their surprise was apparent. Kakashi-sen. Sakura's cry was cut off when the 2 assailants pulled the chain taut, slicing Kakashi's body into 3 separate bloody chunks. The pinkett froze at the sight, her body going rigid and her mouth dry, the scream dying in her throat. She couldn't even lift a hand to warn Naruto as the 2 darted forward again, wrapping up the surprised blonde and pulling a similar maneuver. Where everyone expected the wet squelch of flesh being cleaved, they were confused to hear the dull thud of metal embedding in wood. Even the 2 assailants looked at the boy in surprise, at least until they saw him smirk at them. Sasuke, now. With a puff of smoke the Naruto in front of everybody transformed into the smooth wooden form of Dami. Sasuke appeared above it, kunai in hand and ready to launch at one of the assailants. Now easily identifiable as Kirigaku or ninja from their headbands. However, as the 2 moved to separate and dodge the assault they found themselves stuck. Looking back, they saw what they first assumed to be some kind of elaborate substitution actually holding the chain. The articulated fingers of the puppet kept a tight grip on the shuriken chain, forcing the 2 to release it from the attaching gauntlets to be free. Damn brats, what the hell's a puppeteer doing here? One of Sasuke's kunai managed to clip one of the missing nin on the arm and Sasuke immediately rushed to pressure him, keeping the man busy with an impressive bout of taijutsu, all the while avoiding the vicious-looking gauntlet. The other attacker turned to look for where Naruto was hiding only to suddenly move out the way as Dami went on the offense. The puppet had gathered up the shuriken chain and was whipping it out at the man who was forced to use his gauntlet to avoid it. However, it quickly became apparent Dami was not a puppet well suited for combat, as the attacker managed to duck under a swipe of the chain and lunge forward, cleaving off a whole arm at the elbow and forcing Dami to drop the chain. His confidence that the mannequin was no longer a threat was his undoing. In a smooth motion, Dami raised up the stump of its arm and with a quiet pneumatic hiss fired a single kunai. It impacted with an unsettlingly wet squelch right into the man's eye, and just like that, he died. A few meters away, Sasuke was still embroiled in a rather intense taijutsu fight. Sweat ran down his forehead from the number of times he was forced to veer off or get poisoned by the gauntlet. He eventually managed to get enough breathing room to flash through a string of hand seals. His opponent dodged out of the way of the telegraphed fireball, but his surprise at a genin managing such a feat kept his mind occupied long enough that he never saw the knee impact with his temple. The entire ambush was over in under 30 seconds. It was quick, it was intense, and it was brutal. Afterwards, though, there was a strange calm as the three genin surveyed the battlefield. Naruto dropped out of the tree he had been hiding in, a rather blank look on his face as he stared at the man quietly bleeding out on the floor, dead long before he even hit the ground. Kakashi-sensei, you're okay. Naruto didn't even look up as his sensei emerged from the surrounding forestry. He had seen the man's substitution. It was what tipped him off to perform one of his own. Of course, you don't think an attack like that could get me, do you? No, Naruto didn't look, he just stared at the slowly paling form of the man lying on the ground. This was the first human he had ever killed, indirectly through a puppet or not, and he wasn't sure what he should be feeling. It struck him as odd that he would even think about it. After all, this was supposed to be traumatic, right? He had taken away the life of another living, sentient being. The time he would have lived was gone because Naruto had the capability to take it away, and had. Then why did he feel nothing? Not a flicker of emotion entered his heart. His eyes simply stared forward with the same clinical detachment that he might have had when looking at a dead animal on his workshop table. His eyes picked up the way his joints placed themselves when he fell, the way the blood dripped slowly and steadily from the wound, the way the remaining eye hadn't quite closed so he could still see the widened pupil, perpetually locked in shock. Naruto. The blonde started as Kakashi lay a hand on his shoulder. Are you okay? He blinked once before his usual bored look returned to his eyes. He quickly shrugged off Kakashi's hand but still found himself unable to tear his gaze away from where the man lay before him. Why did he feel so little? Was this normal? Was he normal? I'm fine. Good. There was no catch in his voice. He was confused enough already without tipping off his sensei that something felt wrong. You did what you had to, Naruto. That's okay, you know. Naruto finally looked away from the body, a scowl alighting on his features for a fraction of a second. I know. I said I'm fine. Kakashi hesitated before quickly patting the top of Naruto's hood, disliking how it took away his pleasure at ruffling his student's hair. Well, I'm here if you need to talk, Naruto. A ninja's first kill can be hard. Naruto's eyes just narrowed as he continued to look anywhere but at the body on the ground. It wasn't because it disgusted him, or because it brought up nasty emotions. He just thought that if he looked at it again he might not be able to look away this time. He needed something to take his mind off it. They had bounties, right? Kakashi blinked in surprise as he looked down at the young blonde who seemed to have practically forced that out. Huh. Naruto's eye twitched as he pointed at the dead body without looking at it. Bounties? They're missing Nin after all. The demon brothers, if I remember right. Kakashi hesitated before a small smile crept onto his lips. Every shinobi had their coping mechanisms, he supposed. Who was he to balk at being a bit mercenary? You keep up to date with the bingo books. Naruto smirked under his hood, the expression hidden by the shadows. Why so surprised? You gave me my first after all. Kakashi's smile softened slightly at that. You remembered. Naruto scoffed lightly. Please, there are no other shinobi with your stupid hair. I was young, not blind. Kakashi chuckled lightly, ignoring the comment about his hair. You never said anything. Naruto smirked again, feeling rather awkward just standing around having a stupid sentimental talk like this. It was a rather odd situation, what with the dead and unconscious bodies nearby. Neither did you. Kakashi chuckled again and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. Touché. Although to be fair, I had hoped to inspire you with a goal. I never imagined you would pick puppeteering. Naruto shrugged lightly as he took a step away from the dead body. Kakashi took the hint quickly enough. But no, even if these two have bounties, it's too long a walk to the nearest office. It would count as a deviation from the mission, and I don't have a scroll to seal them into. Naruto narrowed his eyes at that. He didn't have sealing scrolls able to carry bodies. They were more complex than ones able to hold puppets. It was something he was going to have to carry around from now on, just for preparation's sake. No, the best we can do right now is send a message back to Konoha to pick him up, Kakashi continued, turning towards Tazuna. But in the meantime, Client-san, I think we need to have a little talk about assigning the correct rank to a mission, don't you agree? Tazuna gulped, suddenly feeling rather uncomfortable under that cycloptic gaze. Despite Kakashi's implications that the mission might end there, mostly as empty threats to Tazuna, they continued on their journey to Nami no Kuni. It was inevitable really. Sasuke would never back down from something like this. The first real challenge outside the safety of the village where he could push his limits. No chance. Sakura was like a sheep following her shepherd and agreed as soon as she knew Sasuke wanted to continue, if not with slight hesitance. Kakashi would never so easily abandon someone like Tazuna, especially after the man's rather sickening sob story. The Junin's catchphrase was basically never abandoning friends. As for Naruto, well, the young puppeteer wasn't giving up this chance for anything. This was his first trip to another town, another nation. A place outside of his home. It was his first opportunity to make connections, to meet people, to begin a network. If there was one thing Akasuna no Sasori was famous for, or, he supposed, infamous for, besides his puppeteering, it was the expansive spy network he was purported to have throughout the entirety of the elemental nations. Naruto had been dying to start one of his own for years, and this was his chance, in a new place that didn't know him, where his existence was a blank slate. Of course, he had no idea how one went about setting up a spy network. But then, he once had no idea how to be a puppeteer either. It would be a trial and error affair, just like everything else. The important thing was the opportunity, and, in an oppressed place like Nami that would soon be indebted to their team if they succeeded, the opportunity was like no other. There was also a part of him that was excited about that confrontation back there and longed for more. That was the part he tried to ignore as childish impulsiveness. After said encounter though, the blonde was far more wary of his surroundings, not wanting another attacker to get the drop on them. That was why when Kakashi gave the command to drop, he did so immediately, just as a massive spinning blade buzzed overhead through the mist. It slammed into a nearby tree, and it was a miracle the 7-foot sword didn't cleave right through it. Instead a large, muscled man, more imposing than Kakashi's scrawny figure, appeared on the blade, body turned away from them. Well, if it isn't Zabuza Momoki, Nin from the Mist Village. Kakashi stepped forward, his posture giving nothing away as he casually leaned on one foot. However, before he allowed any of his genin to do anything rash, he subtly raised a hand. Stay out of this one, kids. Zabuza's in a whole other league than those Shunin you fought before. As he turned, his visible eye widened when he noticed a distinctive lack of bright blonde hair. Naruto. A loud chortle came from up in the tree where the large shirtless man had turned his whole body to face them. What amazing genin you have there, Sharingan no Kakashi. Behind the two, Sasuke's eyes widened in visible surprise, his hands tightening around the kunai he was holding. Running at the very first sign of a superior opponent, Zabuza chuckled. Smart, but cowardly. Kakashi frowned. Naruto wasn't the type to simply run for no other reason than to escape. He would have a plan of some kind. But then, what did a genin, no matter how prodigious, hope to help in a battle between two seasoned Junin? Sasuke, Sakura, stay back and protect the bridge builder, don't get involved. With that said, Kakashi slipped his lopsided headband up, revealing the fully matured Sharingan in his left eye. Ah, it seems I get to see the Sharingan in action. Zabuza's gruff voice cut in as mist began to draw in toward the clearing, lowering everyone's field of view. Maybe I should feel honored. Kakashi couldn't waste any more time. He didn't know what Naruto was doing, or if Zabuza had accomplices. He had to act soon. I didn't think you would be so hasty to act, Kakashi. It all happened in a split second to the genin. Suddenly Kakashi was up next to Zabuza, standing on the blade as the two locked kunai. Sparks flew as they tested their strengths, and while Zabuza was physically superior, Kakashi's eye could evaluate every muscle twitch and compensate accordingly. In a moment that reeked of grueling training, Zabuza kicked his sword out from under him, spinning the blade with nothing but his foot until he caught it in his hands. Far from being caught unawares, Kakashi bounced back off the tree to avoid the following swipe across his midsection that would have easily bisected him. In midair he twisted, catching his foot on the hilt of the blade and destabilizing Zabuza before completing the motion and scissor kicking the Kiri Junin in the chest. With an underwhelming squelch, his foot passed through nothing but water as Zabuza quickly substituted himself further into the forest. Kakashi didn't pass up on the opportunity to move the fight farther from his genin and immediately pursued. He easily caught up to the Nuke Nin. Konoha shinobi were unsurpassed in the trees, and their fight was on again. Their arms and legs moved in flurries of motion, sparks flying where Kakashi would have to divert the massive but deadly bulk of Kubikiriboku, Zabuza's sever sword, with a simple kunai. Neither really seemed to have the advantage. Zabuza was stronger and faster, but Kakashi had the predictive abilities of the Sharingan. You know Kakashi, as a missed Anbu, we had a standing order to eliminate you on sight, Hatake Kakashi, the man who's said to have copied over 1,000 jutsu. Kakashi narrowed his eyes at the man. He was sure there were more than a few of those standing orders. Shame, we had no kind of order like that for you, guess you just weren't important enough. Instantly the mirth in Zabuza's eyes vanished as his sword swings became more ferocious. The two were forced to separate and, as Zabuza came to land on what appeared to be a solid branch, it immediately broke under his weight. It was only his well-trained ears that let him hear the subtle click of a mechanism. It just allowed him to twist his body and bring his sword in between him and the massive barrage of kunai that had been set loose. With every weapon he deflected he saw the ever so slight sprays of purple ichor flicking off them. Poison. He huffed thoughtfully as he landed on an actually safe bough, looking across at where Kakashi was staring at him. There's no way you had time to set that up while we were fighting. Kakashi's eyes simply crinkled up in amusement, a strange sight with the blood-red visage of the Sharingan in one. I think you'll find that would be my coward of a student. Zabuza grunted again, stretching his neck as he carefully surveyed his surroundings again, suddenly a lot warier. Interesting trap, for a Gaki. Said. Gaki was currently a few hundred meters away from the fight, crouched in a tree as still and quiet as he was able. Chakra threads ran off his fingers like spider webs, each awaiting the slight vibrations that would warn him a trap needed to be set off. Even here, so far from the fight, it was a struggle not to let his hands shake even for a moment. A light droplet of sweat rolled down the back of his neck and his mouth was uncomfortably dry. This was nothing like the fight with the Demon Brothers. Kakashi was right when he said Zabuza was in a whole other league. The powerful natures of their chakras clashing, the nervousness he felt every time their eyes unknowingly slid over his form, the sheer anxiety of being this close to two forces of nature clashing. It was exhilarating. Naruto was terrified of these monsters, but at the same time he had never felt more alive. To even be a part of this clash felt like a privilege, and he wasn't going to waste a moment of it. To that end, as he felt one of his strings vibrate he carefully tugged it, a simple motion that was normally innocuous at best. His reward was an explosion that rippled through the forest, blowing scattered bark and leaves in every direction. Using the noise from the blast he quickly moved position. There was no underestimating Junin of this caliber and he couldn't allow himself to be found for as long as possible. No, then the surprise would be ruined. Rather annoying kid you got there, Kakashi, Zabuza managed to growl out as he leapt away from yet another explosion. He was intercepted in midair while he was off balance and gained a nasty cut up the arm for it. He landed on the floor this time, figuring it was safer than the rigged tree branches. If only Kakashi let up for a moment Zabuza could get away and deal with the brat. He was moving about, but that wouldn't be enough to save him from a master of silent killing. The silver-haired scarecrow wasn't letting up for a moment though. Every trap was an opportunity taken and they always seemed to be in his advantage. What Zabuza didn't know was that Kakashi knew where every trap was. Once he had figured out it was Naruto, he was able to just about spot the thin chakra threads strewn about. They may have been invisible to the naked eye but to his Sharingan they had their own light glow to them. Although the masked Junin had to commend Naruto for actually hiding the majority of his threads on the undersides of tree limbs, it made him difficult to spot in the midst of combat. It was this foreknowledge that made Kakashi smirk as Zabuza touched down on the ground. A ripping sound was heard and suddenly Zabuza's footing was taken out from under him as a simple snare trap wrapped around his foot and hoisted him into the air. For a Junin of his caliber it was simple enough to twist his body and sever the line, but suddenly Kakashi was there and the Kiri-nin was forced to kick him away, unable to use the sword underneath him. The fact he was so nimble even on his hands made Kakashi frown. Right now the advantage was his, but Zabuza wasn't in the habit of leaving openings. If it turned to a battle of attrition then Kakashi would likely come off the worse for it. Suddenly though that didn't seem to be a problem, as from behind Zabuza a familiar and welcome sight burst from the earth. Ramia, in her snake-tailed finesse, moved like a whip to wrap her long flexible body around Zabuza while he was still upside down. The Junin's eyes widened in absolute surprise, never having expected something like this. Suddenly Ramia's tail was around his neck, the open hole at the end pressed warningly up against his throat. What the? Kakashi landed nimbly nearby, wiping the faintest sheens of sweat from his brow as he covered up his Sharingan again. That's good work, Naruto. Thanks for the assist. After a few moments of silence followed by a quick ruffling, Naruto dropped out of the trees. It was fairly obvious to a trained onlooker he was desperately trying to keep some form of composure as Zabuza stared him down with bloody murder in his eyes. However, in a show of bravado that felt entirely false to the young blonde, he held up his hands, forcing the chakra threads connected to Ramia to become visible. It was a clear warning that Naruto could activate any of the mechanisms with a twitch of his fingers. Sorry about not telling you beforehand, sensei. Kakashi sighed as he looked at his student, wondering just what to do with the boy. It's okay, just try not to do it again. You didn't know what you were getting into with a fight between high-level shinobi. Naruto nodded. He knew that all too well now. It was obvious his traps would have been woefully ineffective had Kakashi not been there acting as a distraction, and even Ramia wouldn't have been enough had Zabuza not already been tired out fighting. Hell, it was likely a miracle it worked as well as it did. Even as Naruto thought this, his hands lowered slightly, and Zabuza took his chance. With an unexpected second wind he suddenly twisted his body down, ducking under the tail. At the same moment a heavily poisoned kunai burst from the tip and the tail moved to constrict around his throat. In the same smooth movement he lashed out with his enormous sword, cleaving Ramia's body clean in two at the waist. Naruto's eyes widened at the very sudden destruction of his favorite puppet, but at that moment he had more worrisome things to deal with. Still in the midst of his maneuver, Zabuza suddenly turned to Naruto, his sword extended, his foot ready to bring him that single step closer to the young puppeteer that would guarantee his death. Then, oddly, Zabuza simply slumped to the ground, two long metal needles sticking out the side of his throat. Naruto, panting heavily from the rush of adrenaline, blinked once, then twice, unable to believe he was still alive. A new figure entered the clearing, bearing strange kimono-like clothing that looked heavy to wear and a simple white mask decorated by a red wave and slit-like eye holes. Thank you for the assistance. I have been chasing down Momoki-san for quite a while now. Naruto blinked again before snapping out of his near-death trance, a scowl passing over his features. What are you doing? I had him. Kakashi looked across at his student in surprise, unused to Naruto showing this kind of emotion. Although he supposed he could put that up to the high stress of the situation, he was more confused about the outburst than anything. When he looked around he saw Ramia's lower body still standing up, the sections all down the front of the tail were opened up, revealing a gleaming array of kunai waiting to be fired. Had they been, they would have absolutely shredded through Zabuza's body, which would have shielded Naruto due to his bulk. Yes, but you would have likely died in the process. There was no annoyance or irritation in the newcomer's voice, it was smooth and clinical. Immediately Naruto quietened. It was true that Zabuza's forward momentum, even if he had been littered with poison kunai, would have carried his blade straight through Naruto's body. You're a Hunter-Nin from Kiri, correct? Kakashi decided to step in before his student got in an argument with such a skilled opponent. That accuracy with Senbon was a difficult skill to learn. The masked figure turned to him, their long black hair swaying slightly. With their androgynous appearance and bulky clothing it was hard to determine their gender. Yes, now if you'll excuse me I have to do my job. The Hunter-Nin was about to reach for the body when Naruto quickly stopped them. Wait, that weapon you used, what are they? The shinobi paused, looking up at Naruto with that blank, emotionless mask before one of the long metal needles slid from their sleeves and handed it to him. They are Senbon. Naruto's eyes narrowed, they clearly were not Senbon. Senbon were very thin, long needles used in acupuncture. These were clearly thicker and sturdier than their medicine-based counterparts, however, even looking at them had the gears in Naruto's mind turning. They clearly had greater penetrating power than kunai or shuriken, and they were smaller, so more could be packed into the same area. That meant. If that's all. The Hunter-Nin snapped him out of his thoughts by leaving the question hanging, but Naruto was not done yet. What about the bounty? I bet a shinobi like Zabuza had a massive bounty and we did all your work for you. At this point Kakashi was growing worried, he could feel the onset of exhaustion from overusing his Sharingan. Naruto, don't argue with the Hunter-Nin, we need to. Suddenly his exposed eye grew heavy, need to. Naruto's eyes widened as his sensei suddenly lilted over and the blonde was forced to catch the lanky man before he slumped to the ground. When he looked back around both Zabuza and the Hunter-Nin were gone, making him scowl in irritation. Well damn. After a moment though he looked back down at the innocuous needle in his hand and shrugged. Not a total loss I suppose. With that he began the inevitably long journey back towards his teammates with his sensei awkwardly propped up by his much shorter frame. If only Rami hadn't been broken, he could just get her to carry him. As it was he was going to have to collect her pieces and put her back together. He glanced down at the senbon in his hand again. Although, maybe not completely the same. What do you mean just wait for him to wake up? Sasuke growled at Sakura, who shrank back under his baleful glare. What if Gato has hired more shinobi like Zabuza? Sakura had just been trying to impose some reason amongst the three genin that had been arguing for the past few minutes. Well then what can we do? We need Kakashi-sensei if we want to stand up to anybody like that. We can't fight Junin. Sasuke huffed. It had been like this the entire time. Sasuke was itching to do something after hearing about how Naruto had aided in the battle against Zabuza. Sakura on the other hand wanted to stay put in Tazuna's house. With Kakashi unconscious for the time being, she didn't exactly feel safe. We could hold him off. Sakura was normally the first to agree with Sasuke, but right now her fears were far stronger than her affections. You don't know that, Sasuke. Plus what would we even do? The dark-haired Uchiha growled, leaning further back on his chair at the kitchen table, looking up at the ceiling as if he could see through it to where Kakashi slept. He glanced over, noticing Naruto tinkering with some kind of small mechanism in his hand. He had been rather quiet so far. You think so too, don't you, Naruto, that we shouldn't just wait around? The boy stopped what he was doing to peer up from beneath his hood, clearly annoyed at being interrupted. He was trying to fix some of the fiddlier parts of Ramia that had been destroyed by Zabuza. Without her, he was unfortunately useless in a fight. Don't put words in my mouth. Sasuke scowled at the nonchalant reply, thinking that he was just going to side with Sakura. Indecisive weaklings, all of them. However, there is merit in early action, Naruto conceded. Sasuke's brow rose slightly. Perhaps he spoke too soon. Going out and looking for a fight on the other hand, Naruto slipped the small mechanism back into one of his many pockets before leaning on the table with his elbows. Isn't exactly the action of a shinobi. Sakura sighed internally. Hopefully, with Naruto's agreement, she could convince Sasuke to back down. For some reason the dark-haired boy tended to listen to the blonde's advice. Then what do you propose? Sasuke snapped. Naruto let his head fall slightly, lowering an arm so that he was looking at his two teammates at a slant. Right now what we lack is information. One of us should go to the town and scout it out a bit. We need a feel for what's going on in this nation. Gato's forces, his plans, really anything about him that might paint a clearer picture of what he might do. Sasuke grunted, but he didn't disagree. The academy had always stressed information gathering as an important skill for any shinobi. It was Sakura who raised her hand, a sudden fire lit behind her eyes. I could do that. Naruto smiled at her. It wasn't really a good smile and looked awkward on the blonde's features. No, as the only medic we have on the team you're too important to risk. If Kakashi's condition gets worse you'll need to be here. Sure. That was a reason. It certainly sounded better than the fact he had no faith in her ability to learn anything remotely useful. All the same, the pinkett slumped in her seat, a dejected look on her face as Sasuke turned to Naruto. Then I'll go. He was itching to do something other than just sit around anyway. He was annoyed to find that Naruto simply chuckled at him. Sasuke, an excellent fighter you may be, a people person you are not. Anyway, with my puppet out of commission, for the moment, you are the strongest fighter on our team by far. You'll need to be here to protect both Kakashi and Sakura. A small growl rippled from the Uchiha's throat to make his displeasure known, but he didn't argue. It was hard to when Naruto spoke nothing but the truth, even if it was weighted in his favor. As if you're such a people person. Again, Naruto just chuckled. He supposed his sickly appearance, loner habits and general lack of enthusiasm towards human interaction would give that impression. However, he once again surprised the Uchiha by slowly pulling a hand down his face. When he was finished, the shadows under his eyes were gone, as were his whiskers, and his normally delicate and pale-looking skin had taken on a more healthy tan. He completed the look by shucking his outer jacket. It made him feel more vulnerable but look far more open, especially without the hood shadowing his eyes and hiding his long spiky hair. Hi there, Sasuke, isn't it? The other members of Team 7 were surprised when Naruto assumed a fairly relaxed posture, his tone easy and friendly. He looked across the table and gave Sakura a small wink. Looking like that, he resembled one of those Bishunen, straight out of the magazines she read, and a hint of red immediately entered her cheeks. And you must be Sakura. He reached across the table and quickly took her hand in a firm grip, a casual but warm smile dancing across his lips. By the time he backed away and sat back in the chair, the blush on Sakura's cheeks had only intensified and she was forced to look away. Why aren't you like that all the time? Slowly Naruto's normal features faded back in, revealing it to be some sort of henge. It also revealed the small scowl he now sported as he got up and made his way to the door. Who would want to be so fake? And with that, he just walked out into the night, leaving Sasuke and Sakura alone to figure out what they should do. A young, red-haired man with a warm smile and bright green eyes, a traveler's pack slung over one shoulder, sighed happily as he placed down what was once a large plate of sushi. He leaned back in contentment, rubbing his stomach lightly as he savored the taste of the food. Behind the counter, the young auburn-haired woman manning the stall grinned happily at the first customer she'd had in days. Not only that, but he had bought a lot of food, enough that she didn't have to fear Gato's taxes for another few weeks. Man Ne-chan, that was some damn fine sushi, ya no. And he was so flattering too, calling her Ne-chan so casually like that. Already they had a nice conversation about food and cooking. She had found out the man was actually an avid food connoisseur due to his travels. Briefly, as all conversations were wont to do in Nami nowadays, they had strayed onto the hard times the nation had come under, but they were quick to divert from that. You're too kind, it's nothing special. The man merely chuckled as he placed down a few notes, subtly sliding a small piece of paper in between them before jumping back off his stool. You keep telling yourself that Ne-chanum, but I know special when I taste it. He grinned happily as he ducked out under the curtains to the stall, but not before a last comment. You always have to think that change is just around the corner. And with that he was gone, allowing the woman to visibly deflate as she leaned against her counter. Change. She might have laughed at the thought if all her laughter hadn't been sucked out months ago. There would be no change for Nami. She frowned though as she thumbed the money the kindly stranger had left only to brush across the note. Her eyebrows rose slightly as she read what it said. A short distance away the visage of the kindly redhead faded to reveal Naruto, a thoughtful expression on his face. That was the last stall he would be visiting that night. By now he had a fairly solid grasp of the situation in Wave Country. Hell, just walking around could have done that for him. Idly, he slipped some money, as well as another note, into a young girl's hat that was sat limply in front of her. She weakly played out a few notes on the beaten-up violin in her hands as thanks. From what he had seen, it was a miracle it hadn't been taken from her by the patrolling thugs that wandered around the village. Gato's influence really was everywhere, in the large and brutish men walking around with weapons constantly bared. They were the police, the enforcers, the guards, and the tax collectors of Gato's operation. None of them were chakra users though, just common hoodlums given swords, as well as too much power and money. He had already seen them shake down more than a few people for the tax, which seemed to change randomly on a whim to whatever they felt like at the time. In another instance he had actually seen a young family kicked out of their home for not being able to pay. They were quite literally tossed out onto the street. Naruto had just carried on walking, his hood and goggles covering where his eyes wandered. The air reeked of destitution and hopelessness, to the point where it seemed to even infect the sky. It was as though there were a permanent rain cloud over the quiet little town. People slept out in the streets, or in alleys if they were lucky. Most of them didn't even have shoes anymore. Others just walk the streets, heads low and submissive, a general lack of purpose to their movements and expressions. Everything seemed bathed in various shades of depressing gray, and already Naruto had halted 3 different attempts by kids at stealing the things in his pockets. It was more for their own safety than any real attachment. He carried some dangerous stuff. Occasionally, like had just done, he would hand out a bit of money, or a scrap of food to those he saw surviving. The ones that, despite their skinny bodies and pallid skin, continued to try to do something. Some would perform, even if the pieces and movements lacked luster or energy. Others would try and steal, like those kids. Naruto could appreciate those that stubbornly continued to try even in a poor situation. It struck a chord somewhere with him. And with each bit of food, or handful of money, he slipped a small, inconspicuous note. It was just a simple white card with an even simpler message, but for now, while Naruto's mind was still turning its cogs, it would be enough. Some would immediately throw it away, others might look at it in confusion for a while, but all of them would read it. People in a desperation situation wanted to reach out to any small flicker of hope, however dim. Naruto would know, having lived like that himself and found that ember of hope, fanning it slowly into his art. The note simply read, "Change is coming." By the time he got back, Kakashi was once more among the conscious and was waiting for him in the kitchen, seemingly recovered from his self-induced exhaustion. Naruto briefly wondered just how draining it must be to have an artificially implanted dojutsu in one's eye. Evidently, based on how Kakashi's skin was only now regaining its color and the man didn't seem to want to get up from the chair when he walked in, quite. "It's good to see you up, Kakashi-sensei." His tone didn't really convey the sentiment as he slid a chair out and sat down on it backwards so his chest was pressed up against the backrest. The man simply stared at him with a level gaze for a while. Most would have found it odd to walk in and see a Junin staring down a genin like that. "Sakura tells me you went out to gather information. That was quick of you." Naruto nodded. He was pretty tired right now and wanted to go upstairs and sleep. Admittedly, without easy access to his workshop, ideas were coming to him slowly right now, so he'd actually gotten a fairly normal night's sleep the other day, but still. "I found out where Gato lives and works, the nearest 3 villages to us and some of the patrol routes of his thugs, although they are erratic and random at best." Naruto just decided to tell the Junin the truth. The man had an uncanny knack at looking right past lies. Lies of omission on the other hand were anybody's game. Kakashi may have been able to tell he was hiding something, but Naruto was always hiding something, so there wasn't much he could do. "I appreciate the effort, but there really was no need. After all, our mission is to simply guard Tazuna while he finishes work on the bridge." Naruto raised an eyebrow but shrugged all the same. "Oh well, you can never be too prepared. We couldn't know how long you would be out for or if Gato had decided to send everyone else." Kakashi nodded slowly, his eye turning up into his signature smile. "It's nice to feel so concerned over, but there's no need to worry, I just haven't used the eye in a while and overdid it slightly." Naruto shrugged and made to leave the kitchen. It was a bit disrespectful, but so was arriving to everything hours late. "Speaking of which," Kakashi continued, making the blonde pause in the doorway, "you never did seem all that surprised." Naruto chuckled tiredly, letting out a small yawn as he rounded the doorway without even turning back. "Come on, sensei, your nickname is Sharingan no Kakashi." And with nothing more said he quietly slipped upstairs for some much appreciated shut-eye. The next day, Naruto could be found up on the roof of Tazuna's house. It seemed despite his tiredness the previous day his body's erratic sleep schedule saw fit to wake him up near the crack of dawn. Around him, he could spot the early morning mist rolling in from the ocean and birds were beginning to make their presence known in the trees. It was nice to just be alone with his thoughts every so often, especially after starting as a genin and having much of his day suddenly taken up with D ranks. Right now he was pondering something that had been on his mind since seeing the condition of Nami the other night. He was thinking about how he wanted people to view him. Normally this was a fairly normal thought for a young prepubescent teen, however in Naruto's case, it was more how he wanted his eventual network to see him. Naturally, if he wanted information through such a source he would inevitably need to talk to, or at least communicate with, people. How that would go would be entirely up to him. Already he had seen how effective Gato's strategy of total control through the elimination of hope and will was. It secured a fast and effective domination with little chance of resistance. At the same time, it was like building a mighty house atop foundations of sand. Alone the house may stay up, but over time the chances of the foundations giving way only grew. Despite the general hopelessness of Nami, humans weren't creatures to give up so easily, and the seeds of dissent were already there, waiting to be nourished. It was an effective, but ultimately short-sighted approach. On the other side of that mirror, Naruto considered Konoha, where there were legions of shinobi prepared to give up their lives for their Hokage, for the Will of Fire. Naruto, as an outcast of this system, had never felt so much a flicker of this ideal, but he could certainly appreciate its effectiveness. While the control may not be so absolute, as people working under what they believed was a good and righteous rule didn't want to perform ostensibly evil acts, in the long term their loyalty was secured. Unfortunately, such a system had taken years of grounding and integration, not to mention the subtle indoctrination in the academy, to accomplish. And of course, the obvious examples like Orochimaru of the Sannin and Uchiha Itachi proved there were fatal flaws to the practice. So, while that approach had a great deal more promise in the long term, small mistakes tended to spiral into much larger ones with greater ease. At least under the former way, mistakes and abnormalities would be quashed before they grew too troublesome, as long as enough oversight is maintained. It was a difficult topic for a boy just coming into his teen years, but one that weighed on his mind nevertheless. His mind drifted to Sasori, as he tended to do when he reached an impasse in his thoughts. The man was a missing nin, so his methods couldn't generally be described as humane or ethical, in which case, it was likely he had taken some form of the former strategy when it came to his own network. At that thought though, Naruto realized he had found his answer. As much as he admired and looked up to his unlikely inspiration, he couldn't be a carbon copy of the man. Somehow it seemed remarkably fitting that the first ever puppeteer to be seen out of Suna began his foundations on something a little more solid than sand. Come on Kakashi-sensei, you know it makes the most sense, Naruto argued in a neutral, almost emotionless tone. He couldn't appear too invested in the plan, that would be suspicious. And yet involves the most unnecessary risk, came the silver-haired Junan's calm reply. Only with poor planning, or don't you believe in your students? Kakashi's eyebrow rose at the faux hurt tone Naruto put on. Believe, yes. Trust to perform an assassination mission. No. Naruto shrugged, like the man's casual dismissal of his plan wasn't a big deal. They had been going back and forth on this for a god few minutes now. I've already said it isn't assassination, it's simply exfiltration from his mansion so that proper justice can be served. Kakashi continued to read his book and gently sip at his herbal tea, his body language dismissive. And since when a shinobi, or you for that matter, such paragons of justice? That was a fair point, if a little blunt. After all, shinobi were just glorified mercenaries. Naruto could have done without the slight though, as true as it was. We've always been a tool for the masses to keep higher powers in check. That was sort of true, at least until the higher powers decided that ninja would be better off working under them. The higher power in this case being an assassination target of a mission we haven't in any way been paid for. At that, Naruto had to raise an eyebrow. Kakashi was really playing the money angle. Maybe exhaustion had affected him more than the blonde originally thought. No, but we have been paid for a protection detail, and Tazuna will never be effectively safe until Gato is dealt with. Even the bridge he is building could simply be torn down once we are gone. Kakashi shrugged with a complete lack of concern bred from 2 decades of being a shinobi. Not our problem, we do what we were paid to do, no more no less. Naruto ran a hand through his hair slowly, it was one of those rare times he actually had his hood down. It was to try and add the human touch to the argument. Deposing Gato would mean Nami's economy stabilizing. I'm sure they would be thankful to Konoha afterward. A debt from a strategically placed nation like Nami would be indispensable to Konoha and Hi-no Kuni alike. Or, we risk angering the man already legally in control of the nation, and Hi-no Kuni's transportation services by sea are cut off. Naruto snorted lightly. From what he had seen, Gato was an adherent only to the letter of the law, and made a pastime of trampling its spirit. All the more reason to have your input so things don't go badly. Plus, right now is an opportune time to strike, while Gato can't rally any more ninja to come after us. Right now his forces consisted of mainly converted bandits and street thugs, cannon fodder to even rookie genin. For a moment Kakashi just stared at his book, his eyes not particularly focused on it. Over the day Naruto had noticed the man spacing out at irregular intervals, as if he were mulling over a particularly difficult problem. It seemed to start after Naruto gave his rundown of the events following his collapse. Naruto, tell me again what the Hunter-Nin did with Zabuza's body. Naruto sighed as he brushed more hair away from his eyes. This was why he liked his hood, it kept his messy locks in check. Sensei, changing the topic is just childish. Kakashi just gave him a level stare for a long few moments, forcing the boy to roll his eyes and lean back on his chair. Like I said, I'm not sure. When I looked back up after you fainted. Fell briefly to exhaustion, Kakashi quickly interjected. Naruto raised an eyebrow but continued anyway. Both the Hunter-Nin and Zabuza's body were gone. Why? Kakashi sighed, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Because I don't think that was a real Hunter-Nin, and Zabuza isn't dead. To his credit, Naruto's mouth only fell open a little. Almost an hour later, after Kakashi had explained his speculation to all of his students, including the proper technique for a Hunter-Nin when they deal with a corpse, which only served to make Sakura ill, and Naruto was back at it. Kakashi had insisted on training the three up to a level where they wouldn't be a hindrance in a fight with Zabuza and his newly identified accomplice. Naruto on the other hand vehemently supported the original plan of striking first and removing Zabuza's source of income as to remove him as a threat entirely. This finally seemed to be the tipping point for Kakashi as he weighed up his woefully underexperienced genin's safety against the risks an assassination would pose. It wasn't just to their health, it was also to their innocence. There were reasons assassinations were a Shunin-level mission parameter. However, Naruto had already killed, any innocence of that kind had been lost to him now. Finally, he relented under Naruto's constant pestering and allowed the boy to come up with a plan of how he would do it, just to see what the boy came up with. He was surprised then when, minutes later, Naruto plopped a small, neat folder down in front of his jotted with small, scrawled notes and rather detailed, obviously professional blueprints of Gato's mansion and office. To the blonde, the look on the silver-haired Junin's face was priceless. Naruto, where did you get time to find these blueprints? The Puppeteer shrugged as he sat himself down, Sakura and Sasuke sitting at the other end of the table and watching curiously as their teammate actually coerced their sensei into an assassination. Tazuna had them. He built most of the larger structures in this country, mansion included. Kakashi blinked, having sort of forgotten the fact that their client was also a rather successful architect. And this plan. It was a bit rudimentary and any Anbu captain would look at it and scoff, but for a genin it was rather impressive, if not straightforward. I started on it yesterday. Kakashi's eyebrow twitched. That meant Naruto had been expecting him to fold. After going over it though, he really had nothing to complain about and with a final, exhausted sigh he just gave in. It was just so much easier that way. Naruto walked out of Tazuna's house in a rather uncharacteristically good mood. It was rare for things to so prolifically go his way. As if thinking about his own good fortune somehow soured it, Sasuke appeared. Want to have a spar? The question was deceptively innocent and wouldn't have gone too out of place amongst most genin teams. However, this was Team 7, the one with a fangirl and two loners that don't really enjoy interacting with people. Why? Naruto was cautious with his answer. Sasuke had been weird ever since the confrontation with Zabuza. He seemed unusually restless, kept giving Naruto odd, almost seething looks, and was even more dismissive of Sakura than normal. Isn't that what teammates do? That brought a small humorless smirk to Naruto's features. How would either of us know? Sasuke just grunted, but he didn't disagree. Well, do you want to spar? Naruto snorted, moving to push past the dark-haired Uchiha. He had preparations to set up. For what? To inflame your ego and prove what we both already know, that your taijutsu is vastly superior to my own. Naruto just shook his head, hands immediately seeking his pockets as he pulled his hood back up. You don't want to spar, you want to fight. Sasuke just turned and grabbed his shoulder, his features set in a scowl and a glint in his eye. Fine then, a fight, I don't care. Naruto looked at Sasuke for a few moments before snorting again, moving to leave and ignore the boy until he stopped acting so childishly. It was obvious that his superiority complex was acting up and ordering him to assert his dominance over Naruto. Most likely it was because of what the boy perceived his role to be in the fight against Zabuza. Where Naruto merely provided some support from the sidelines like any genin could have done, Sasuke still saw it as involvement in a high-level confrontation. No, Ramiya is still out of action. In truth, he had fixed all of the small broken components within Ramiya's torso, he only needed to reattach the severed halves. He just didn't particularly want to waste time fighting his teammates, as entertaining as it might be. He made to leave again, only to miss Sasuke smirk imperiously at his back. So what? You're useless without your dolls. Naruto paused, and Sasuke's smirk twisted into a victorious grin. The blonde turned back to his teammate, eye twitching slightly before he reaffirmed his features and allowed a small, unsettling smile to grow on his lips. All right, let me just grab a few things from my bag, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Sasuke just nodded quickly, anything to make his teammate fight him. With that, Naruto walked off back towards the house, but not before quickly veering off into the forest once he was out of Sasuke's line of sight. Just as the boy was beginning to feel the stirrings of impatience, Naruto reappeared, almost 5 minutes later on the dot. A small smile adorned the boy's face and he was once again clothed in his full gear, puppets notwithstanding. Just as Sasuke was about to ask if he was ready, Naruto suddenly spread his jacket. He was quickly revealed to be wearing an entire roll of explosive notes, one of which was quite happily fizzling away. Ready to start. And without further pause, Naruto exploded into a fine hail of wood and other miscellaneous debris. Up in the trees of the forest, some distance away, Naruto winced, watching the final end of Dami, or at least that permutation of him. In truth, he was a rather simplistic puppet and would be easy to rebuild at home, but it wasn't really all that pleasant to see any of his puppets destroyed. Luckily for him, Sasuke had enough time to dodge the explosion by leaping back into the trees, only gaining a few light scratches from the shrapnel. The notes had been rather low yield and half of them were just flash tags, so, short of Sasuke running up and hugging the puppet before it blew, there hadn't been much danger. Unfortunately for Sasuke, Naruto had not intended to blow his teammate up, he simply wanted him in the forest. This was quickly made apparent as two of Naruto's fingers twitched, setting off identical explosions at the base of two trees, once again forcing Sasuke back and further into the forest. What are you doing, Naruto? The boy called out into the forest, favoring his left side thanks to a long scratch running up his arm. Using his skills in ventriloquism and a healthy application of chakra to his vocal cords, Naruto made his voice scatter about the forest, bouncing it off trees to disorient and confuse the Uchiha. You wanted a fight, didn't you? This is how I fight. Again his fingers twitched, and this time a large volley of kunai was set free, quickly bearing down on his opponent. Sasuke instinctively jumped at the sound of the mechanical click and was lucky for it. Naruto had been aiming for his legs after all. Expecting another trap, he looked around warily and was rewarded by just about spotting the faint glint of thin steel ninja wire appearing from the nearby trees to wrap him up. He gracefully jumped over the glinting threads only to suddenly find himself without leverage and facing down another small barrage of kunai. Reflexes saved him that time as he managed to grab the first out of the air and use it to bat away the next with a great deal of exertion. He quickly dropped the kunai when he realized it was coated in a thin purple film and was thankful for the fingerless gloves he wore that prevented it getting on his skin. He was growing annoyed with this now. It wasn't a fight, it was a glorified training course. Come on, Naruto, you can't have set too many traps in 5 minutes, why don't you actually come out and fight me? He was surprised then, having only really said it as a taunt, when he got a reply. Okay. This time there was no voice modification trickery and Sasuke clearly heard the voice almost directly above him. When he looked up, all he got was the bottom of Naruto's sandal as the boy used his face as a stepping stone. Sasuke was right, Naruto had been running out of traps, so for the past few seconds he had been maneuvering himself into position right above the boy, stuck to the underside of a branch with chakra. It was worth the blood rush to his head to see Sasuke gripping his nose like that, blood beginning to pour from it. Deciding not to give the prodigiously talented taijutsu user a chance to recover, Naruto rushed forward, managing to get a clean hit to the ribs before Sasuke recovered. That was all he got though, as Sasuke cleared his head and responded viciously. He locked Naruto's next punch under his arm, caught the following kick and promptly, in a very un-Uchiha manner, head-butted Naruto in the face. It left both boys with similarly bloodied noses. Naruto was still precisely where he wanted to be though. Getting in this close and locking himself with Naruto proved a fatal error for Sasuke as Naruto angled his remaining arm up at the boy's chest. With a dull thwip, a single long, metal needle shot from Naruto's sleeve, embedding a few inches into Sasuke's chest. The effect was immediate and Sasuke's body fell limply to the ground, his eyes wide. Naruto took a moment to wipe his nose of blood until it was clean before grinning down at the boy. Want to go again? Sasuke growled, finding that while he couldn't move an inch of his body, speech was not taken from him. What the hell was that? Naruto simply pulled his long jacket sleeve up. Usually it served to hide the movement of his fingers, but it also did a good job of concealing the strange mechanism strapped to his arm. It was crude and hastily jury-rigged into position, only able to fire a single senbon before it needed reloading, but it was effective. There was also the small fact that all Naruto had on hand were actual medicinal senbon, not the combat-grade ones the Hunter-Nin had used. It still worked as a vector for poisons though. Pretty neat, huh? I configured it from a similar launcher mechanism in Dami's arm. He actually looked rather proud of it, because it was less than 5 minutes work after all. You cheated. Naruto scoffed as he rolled his sleeve back down. There's no such thing in a fight, I just improvised. Sasuke really wanted to punch the boy then, but his arms were still immobilized. What did you do to me? Naruto shrugged nonchalantly. The paralysis. Don't worry about that. You should be up again in a few minutes. His face took a thoughtful turn. Then again, the biggest thing I've tested it on is a rabbit, but I'm pretty sure I got the concentration and dosage right. He shrugged again, seemingly done with his internal debate. Dinner time at the latest. He nodded to himself, apparently satisfied with the assessment, and on that note he quickly left, leaving Sasuke to shout obscenities at his back until he regained mobility almost half an hour later. Naruto didn't have time for things like that though, he had a short and power-hungry businessman's assassination to deal with. Gato grumbled to himself under his breath, wincing as he rolled his arm slightly. That little brat had really done a number on it back at Zabuza's hideout. He absently straightened his suit as he walked through the walled-off gates of his manor, not even bothering to glance at the two guards standing to either side. As long as they were doing their job, he didn't give a crap what they did or how they saw him, so he kept his narrowed eyes dead ahead. As normal, he had two of his best thugs, each a traveling Ronin before he hired them, flanking him. They served as good intimidation to any would-be attackers, thanks to the glinting swords each carried. His attention was on the problem of what to do about the bridge builder now that Zabuza and his brat had proved unreliable. On the side he mulled over how he would deal with them. Obviously he wasn't going to pay them, as he hated inefficient work. It was a difficult prospect though, and although sending out a missive for nearby thugs and Ronin to gather so he could use them to take the missing Nin out and collect his bounty had seemed like a good idea at first, he was beginning to have second thoughts. He grinned, realizing he could just use the inevitable conflict between Zabuza and the Konoha Nin before swooping in and mopping up whoever was left. They would likely be weakened anyway. He rolled his neck as he walked through the antechamber to his office, accepting the cup of coffee put in his hand by his assistant without a word. He sighed as he took a sip, enjoying the flavor of Nami's own blend. It was one of the reasons he had considered moving his operation to the Backwater Nation in the first place. For a moment though he paused, looking back at his assistant with a frown as the dark-haired man returned to his own little desk. The man seemed different today, although Gato couldn't place it. Deciding that he already had enough to think about, he just shrugged it off and entered his office. Hello Gato-san. What he didn't expect to see was a young hooded boy with messy blonde hair that couldn't have been older than 13. He had his feet kicked up on Gato's immaculate wooden desk as he casually sifted through a few documents. What the hell is this? Who let this gaki in my office? A blood vessel pulsed dangerously on Gato's forehead at this serious breach in security. Hisashi, Aki, get him out, right now. When there was no sound of movement, the diminutive businessman quickly checked behind him only to fall back in horror. As a businessman that had traveled rather extensively before settling in Nami no Kuni, Gato could profess to having experienced quite a bit of the shinobi world. The abomination of snake and woman in front of him though, lifting up and choking both of his loyal guards, was a first. What the hell is that? Naruto grinned uncharacteristically as he spun on the comfy revolving chair before flipping over the desk and landing by the man's side, making him scrabble further away. Do you like her? I call her Ramia. He patted the puppet on the side fondly, his other hand ensuring the construct didn't let go of the two suffocating Ronin. What's going on here? Who are you? The man's eyes frantically traced over the boy only to find no identifying insignia or symbol anywhere on the boy's form. You're a shinobi, aren't you? Where's your headband? Naruto's eyebrow rose as he looked down at himself, almost as if he honestly didn't know he was missing one. Oh, here and there I suppose. I have so many pockets sometimes even I lose track. Gato couldn't find the humor in the joking words while his bodyguards were slowly strangled and the boy continued to advance on him. As for what's going on, what does it look like, Gato-san? This is the liberation of Nami no Kuni. Finally, Gato seemed to snap out of it, maybe because of his own anger, or perhaps because his mind continued to scream at him that this was just a boy. Liberation. Gato spat on the floor in front of him. Don't make me laugh. If I die then Nami will fall apart faster than you could blink. Naruto paused for a moment with an indecipherable expression, causing Gato to smirk victoriously. It was swiftly wiped from his face as Naruto cocked his head and returned the smile, unnerving the small man. Your concern for Nami's well-being is admirable, if unnecessary. I have no intention of letting such a gem of a country go to waste like that. He looked out the panoramic window at the back of Gato's office on the sprawling forestland beyond. The sea was visible like a streak of glittering blue on the horizon, with just the faintest hints of the early morning fog as it receded back into the water. It made for a rather surreal and fantastical sight. You really do have excellent taste for choosing it. At this point Gato had hauled himself to his feet, feeling no immediate danger from the blonde teen in front of him. So what then, you'll just kill me? I own all of Nami. If I die, then all those assets are immediately dissolved into the business, you'll have accomplished nothing. Naruto shrugged as he waved his hand nonchalantly, walking back over to the desk and perching on the edge. That can be quite easily solved with a few signatures here and there. Gato scoffed as he wiped down the front of his suit, having gotten over his shock at his bodyguard's demise around the same time Ramia had allowed their limp forms to slump to the ground. And what makes you think I'll give my signature to you, Gaki? Naruto turned back to him, lips twisting into a smile as he held up two sheets. One was a fairly simply transaction order, signed and stamped at the bottom in Gato's hand. The other sheet was just a blank piece of paper, save for the immaculately copied signature scrawled across the top. You already have. Gato scowled, the signature was damn perfect, down to the slight flicks to the dotted kanji. He didn't know that perfecting one's calligraphy was the first step in learning fuinjutsu, an art Naruto was forced to learn to make his puppets even remotely combat-ready. Copying a signature was the least Naruto could do with the art, even at his rather rudimentary level. Suddenly signing over so many of the company's assets right before my death. Gato practically spat, clutching at straws to prolong his life and think of a way out of this. It'll be suspicious, nobody will accept it. Naruto just chuckled softly, turning in a way that the light streaming in through the massive window caused his eyes to be shadowed. And there is your downfall, Gato-san. You were so paranoid about an event like this occurring, that you made sure to completely monopolize your own company, delegating responsibilities to few and far between. You practically run the entirety of Gato shipping and transport and your word is law. Fortunately, your copied word seems to be just as good. It doesn't pay to be disliked, just ask your assistant. Gato growled, knowing he had been sold out by the reedy, dark-haired man. It was no wonder he had felt something off about him today. So what? You have everything you need. Why haven't you killed me yet? There must be a reason. At that, Naruto's grin only widened, made creepy by the fact his eyes were completely enshrouded in darkness to give him an almost Cheshire-like appearance. Absently he looked over at the clock on the wall that had been steadily ticking away throughout their conversation. Did you enjoy the coffee today, Gato-san? I brewed it myself. Gato was about to ask what he meant before he suddenly found his vision blurring, his eyelids growing extremely heavy and his body oddly numb. He swayed for only a moment before slumping to the side, completely unconscious. Naruto's smile slowly bled away as he ignored the now sleeping man in favor of the documents lying on his desk. He picked one up and scanned through it, shaking his head like a mother might when scolding a child. Oh, Gato, drug trafficking, slave trade, illegal weapons smuggling. Someone was a very naughty boy. He looked up, seeming to rethink his thought before grinning, sparing a glance over at the painting on the wall he knew to hide a large and easily broken into safe. A very rich naughty boy. He chuckled to himself as he continued scanning the documents, writing up and signing the ones he would need for his plans to work. Really, he was amazed that this on-the-fly plan was going so well. He was almost waiting for something to come along and ruin it. Tomorrow Team 7 would enact his plan to assassinate Gato, only to find the man had fled the country. He would act disappointed, irritated even, and Kakashi would be there with a consoling, but patronizing eye smile. In the Junin's eyes, a fleeing Gato would be just as good as a dead Gato, and that would be that. He began to whistle softly as he continued his work. It would likely take him a few hours to double-check he hadn't missed anything. All the while, Ramiya maintained a silent vigil. Zabuza stood in the center of the room, Kubakiriboku held out in front of him as he slowly moved through his Kenjutsu kata. His movements, while not fast, were perfectly controlled and measured, his footwork impeccable. He moved as if the world were in slow motion, slicing through the crowd of invisible enemies around him and grinning with his pointed smile as their translucent blood splattered over his form. His ears twitched, and his enormous cleaving sword was sent spinning across the room to embed in the wall. It would have embedded in the intruder's face if they hadn't leapt to the side at the last moment. Whoa, so sensitive. Zabuza growled as his eyes opened to see the same little brat that had helped Kakashi in their earlier fight that caused him to be laid up for a week. Even now his muscles hadn't quite recovered from Haku's death-simulating technique. He was good enough to take on any genin though. If this is an assassination, it's the poorest one I've ever seen. Naruto made no sudden movements as he put on a placating smile, pulling his hood down and slowly brushing a hand through his spiky locks. My sensei had a theory you were alive. I just wanted to see if it was true. Naruto abruptly froze, a slight gulp escaping his throat as a very sharp and very cold senbon was pressed up against what he knew to be a vital point on his neck. And that would answer my other question about the Hunter-Nin. He slowly craned his neck and gave an unconvincing smile to the dark-haired boy behind him, his eyes crinkling into slits as a bead of cold sweat dripped down his forehead. I don't know if you're an idiot, or have some kind of death wish Gaki, but it was stupid just walking in here. Where's your sensei? Where's the copy ninja? Naruto shrugged, again making sure to do it slowly as the ever-present reminder of his swift death continued to be held to his neck. As far as I know, back at Tazuna's house. Zabuza raised a non-existent eyebrow at that. Did Konoha just send their genin on suicide runs now? How did you even find this place? Zabuza questioned gruffly, as he walked over to retrieve his blade from the concrete wall. Gato made a note of all your hideouts around the country. From there it was a process of elimination until I found you. Again, Zabuza's brow rose questioningly at the statement. You, singular. Naruto nodded again and Zabuza let out a brusque chuckle before going back over what the blonde had said. Gato sold us out to you. This time Naruto slowly shook his head before explaining. Not quite, although if it means anything, he was going to. Zabuza scrutinized the currently captive blonde before making a vague dismissive motion with his hand. Instantly, the Hunter-Nin took their senbon from his neck and moved to stand next to Zabuza, letting Naruto release a small sigh of relief. He was rather surprised to find the Hunter-Nin to be a rather effeminate-looking boy with long dark hair and suspiciously kindly brown eyes wearing an all-too-pink kimono and dark choker. Hell, if Naruto hadn't done the research on the female form for his puppets, he might have mistaken him for a girl. Explain. Zabuza cut off his musing with the rough demand. He smiled placating again. Even if it didn't seem to help, there was no harm trying. Gato is currently rather indisposed, so I'm afraid he's no longer viable as a paycheck. At Zabuza's clear irritation, Naruto was rather glad he hadn't led with that. However, he quickly interjected as the former swordsman looked ready to get a little stab happy with his blade. He was planning on double-crossing you anyway. He's been in correspondence with Kiri Hunter-Nin for the past few days. He produced a set of papers from one of his jacket pockets and slid them across the floor. They were completely and utterly fake, of course, but Naruto honestly wouldn't have put it past the ruthless little businessman. Zabuza huffed as he flicked through the letters disinterestedly, however it only appeared that way. Underneath, he was simmering with rage at the planned betrayal by his contractor. The little runt was lucky somebody had gotten to him before Zabuza did, else the man wouldn't have made his passing quick, or all that pleasant. Finally, he tossed them to the floor, no longer having used for them. Haku seemed a little dismayed at this and Naruto got the impression Zabuza wouldn't be the one tidying up. What's your point, Gaki? Why even bother telling us this? Eventually Zabuza would have realized Gato wasn't checking up on him anymore and discover he was dead. In his mind he saw no reason for the opposing team to risk themselves this way just to inform him. Oh, no reason, it was just a bonus. My teammates are no good to me dead after all. Zabuza raised a brow but didn't comment. There was something about the kid's particularly ruthless streak that resonated with him. No, the real reason I'm here is because of him. Naruto lazily pointed at the fake Hunter-Nin who was in the process of picking up the sheets of paper strewn everywhere. Haku. Said boy looked up in surprise to see Naruto lowering his arm and nodding with a congenial smile. Yes, if at all possible I would like to spar with him. He seemed about my age but very strong. I thought it would be a good test for me. There was a long moment of silence before Zabuza burst out laughing, an unpleasant, barking sound that grated on the ears. You came all this way, went through the trouble of finding this place, risking your own neck, all for a fight. He laughed again, leaning back on a crate and propping his hands on his blade's hilt. I think I'm beginning to like you, kid. His gaze shifted to his young apprentice. What do you say, Haku? Fancy a spar? The boy blinked, surprised at being given the choice as he looked over at the blonde. He was in the process of bringing his hood back over his hair. Just a spar. Naruto grinned with his eyes closed, his hands coming up placating. The gesture seemed less sincere when his jacket covered up said hands to hide the movements of his fingers. Just a spar, all friendly. I won't even use my lethal poisons. Haku blinked. He had never really had a friendly spar with somebody of his own age group. Being on the run with Zabuza never allowed for it. After a moment of consideration, the edges of his lips quirked up and he nodded slowly, causing Naruto's grin to grow. Excellent. Naruto bounced on his feet lightly, cracking his neck as he stood opposite Haku with a small smirk growing on his face. He felt excited. This would be the first time he could really test himself against someone other than Sasuke. The Uchiha was no fun because Naruto mostly knew what to expect. Haku was new, exciting and unpredictable, and Naruto relished the challenge of the unknown. To his side, Ramiya silently swayed. He figured it would be best to have her out, as the surprise wouldn't work on Haku anyway, the boy having seen the snake-based puppet before. Alright, get ready. Naruto felt his muscles tense and he could barely keep his fingers from twitching as Zabuza set him off from the side of the clearing. They were lucky Zabuza's hideout was so far from Tazuna's house or this wouldn't have been possible. Go. Zabuza's arm came down and immediately both boys leapt into action in their own way. Haku sprang forward, his speed momentarily catching Naruto off guard before the blonde recovered and his hidden fingers became a blur of motion. Ramiya swept in front of him, her body coiling around his own as the wooden construct took the hail of steel senbon that appeared in Haku's hands for fractions of a second. They did little to Ramiya's tough skin and soon the puppet could respond in kind as its long, sharply clawed fingers suddenly detached from the hands. They flew outward toward the young Yuki, kept tethered to the puppet by long, prehensile cables that were textured like a carpenter's file along the sides. If they scraped across Haku's skin they would easily tear through, leaving a large dose of poison in his bloodstream. Just because Naruto wasn't trying to be lethal didn't mean he discounted paralytics and muscle relaxants. The boy immediately sensed the danger and leapt away from the wildly whipping cables, knocking them off course with surprising ease using pinpoint senbon throws. Naruto's eyes narrowed in focus as he continued to manipulate Ramiya into at least capturing the boy. However, he was surprised as what appeared to be a large 2 meter by 1 meter thin block of ice rose from the ground in front of the Yuki, to which the boy immediately dived into. For a moment, the blonde was so shocked by the unusual tactic that his fingers went slack, stopping Ramiya in her tracks. A moment later, and he winced as a small barrage of icy senbon began to litter his body. Ramiya being wrapped around him protected his vitals, but he did feel his left arm begin to cramp up, which was a bad thing considering he really needed his arms. Deciding he had left this fight out in the open too long, Naruto surprised Haku, wherever he was hiding, by suddenly using Ramiya as a springboard. She crouched down, tensing, and the moment he stepped on her shoulder she uncoiled, launching the boy high into the air. Now with an aerial view, Naruto grinned as he spotted Haku hiding in the trees. He directed Ramiya over to his position before landing on a tree branch himself, immediately moving further into the forestry. Suddenly, it was the Yuki put on the defensive as the boy found himself dodging vicious tail strikes that easily smashed through sturdy tree trunks. Ramia wasn't a slow puppet by any means, and her reptilian lower body allowed a range of movements that were both unpredictable and unexpected. It only got worse for Haku as the puppet began unleashing small salvos of what he immediately recognized to be medicinal senbon. Fortunately for him, they were much thinner and flimsier than his combat grade ones and didn't fly perfectly straight through the air. This made them easier to dodge and their movements easier to predict. It also made them more difficult to see, and more than a few times the boy felt a breeze as they shot past. All the while he couldn't find Naruto, the boy seemingly having blended himself into the surroundings despite Haku knowing he should have been somewhere nearby. Haku panicked briefly as the tree he was on suddenly toppled due to Ramia's extending claws ripping through the base. As he fell, he glanced down to see the length of Ramia's tail open in its entirety. Where the last time he had seen this happen it had been filled to the brim with kunai, it was now stuffed with senbon. This presented an entirely new range of danger as the senbon could be more tightly packed, resulting in there being hundreds more. Evidently, this was supposed to be impossible to avoid, but Haku surprised Naruto by once again creating another of his ice mirrors and, mid-fall, managing to angle his body into it. The hail of glinting weaponry hit nothing but tree bark and the backside of the slowly melting ice construct. It was only Naruto's instincts that saved him as he rolled off the underside of the branch he was hiding under, watching in surprise as a small line of senbon implanted themselves where he had just been. Moments later, at speeds Naruto couldn't hope to match, Haku appeared below him, catching him with a kick to the chin that launched him further into the forest before rolling to a stop in a slightly more open clearing. Before he could catch his wind, or his bearings, he found himself surrounded by a dome of those same annoying ice mirrors. I'm afraid this is where the spar ends, Naruto-san. This is my ultimate technique, Haku's emotionless voice intoned as he stepped into the mirrors, appearing like a reflection in all of them. Despite that, Naruto could detect the hint of amusement in his tone. The blonde grunted as he cracked his neck, but there was an undeniable smile on his features as his fingers worked furiously. As much as his body hurt, he couldn't deny that this entire experience wasn't exhilarating. He had no intention of stopping here. I'm afraid I have no ultimate techniques, Haku-san, you'll just have to put up with this. Thankful his enemy was one he could keep talking, Naruto's smile broadened as Ramia suddenly burst through one of the mirrors, shattering it like glass as her full bulk crashed right through the sturdy construct. Haku wasted no time in both regenerating the lost mirror and launching a wave of his signature weapon at the blonde. Naruto managed to surprise him once again though as Ramia wrapped around his form, the compartment previously filled to the brim with senbon opening up to allow him to climb inside. Suddenly, and for the first time, Haku found somebody trapped within her ice dome that he couldn't touch. He launched hundreds of hastily made senbon he created with his Hyoten chakra, but they all either bounced off Ramia's sturdy body or missed because of the puppet's constantly swaying motions. Haku could already feel the draining effect of his jutsu setting in, so he began quickly leaving the mirrors, flashing between them at undetectable speeds to slash at the puppet's joints instead. This seemed to have a much greater effect as Ramia began to lock up, a moment later ejecting the blonde puppeteer inside. Haku wasted no time as she peppered the boy with needles, to the point where he looked as though he had been forced through an entire acupuncture session. Only once he was motionless on the ground did Haku breathe a sigh of relief, cautiously approaching the boy and keeping a wary eye on his puppet. It was this caution that allowed Haku to barely spot the tiniest flashes of blue light reflected in one of her slowly melting mirrors and jump back into one, just as the Naruto on the ground exploded into a hail of senbon like some kind of human flecket round. Safe behind his mirrors, Haku quickly spotted the blonde hiding behind Ramia and flashed into the dome, holding a senbon directly to the boy's neck in a much less steady grip than a few minutes before. Both boys were breathing a lot heavier, exhaustion and fatigue beginning to set in, but both had their own smiles on their face as Naruto finally raised his hands. Okay, I surrender. When Haku took the senbon away, Naruto happily leant against his puppet, regulating his breathing as he grinned. I thought I had you there at the end. He had kept the shattered body of Dami after fighting Sasuke just in case, and while it was now useless as a puppet he could still apply a henge to it, hoping to catch somebody off guard. Haku just smiled as the dome around them melted away, revealing Zabuza standing just outside, an intrigued glue on his bandaged face. It was close, I admit, was the only response he got from the Yuki, as he too caught his breath. The blonde had given him quite the run around in the forest. Well, it was certainly interesting to watch, I'll give you kids that. Zabuza decided to weigh in, Kubakiriboku slung over one shoulder casually. But as fun as it's been, I'm afraid this is going to have to be goodbye. If those letters you showed me are true, the Hunter-Nin are right on our trail. We're going to have to leave now to build up a suitable lead again. Naruto just nodded understandingly as he straightened up and sealed Ramia away into a quickly hidden scroll. Fair enough, I still enjoyed the opportunity. He offered his hand to Haku, who shook it politely with a small grin. Likewise, I hope we can meet again when both our abilities have matured. Naruto nodded, deciding that he would enjoy that. Zabuza on the other hand just gave a barking laugh as he grabbed Naruto's hand rather roughly. Count me in for that, you two are going to be damn strong, I can already tell. Naruto again smiled at the praise, he was unused to it and it felt good. Despite many in his village recognizing his skill as prodigious, it was only reluctantly said and never where they thought he could overhear. Good luck then, Naruto offered, before watching Zabuza and Haku quickly take their leave. He took a few more moments to collect himself, make sure there was as little evidence of the conflict as possible, and left. He found Tsunami exactly where he had left her, drugged in an alleyway in the village proper, and quickly gave her the counter-toxin. Ara. What happened? The poor housewife looked about in confusion as she returned to the waking world only to see Naruto looking down at her with a concerned expression. Are you alright, Tsunami-san? Naruto offered with all the sincerity he could muster. When I came to help you with shopping you collapsed in the street. I took you over here to rest but you still look rather flushed. Tsunami shook her head a few times, trying to clear it off the fog that had descended over her thoughts, before smiling. I think I should be fine now, thank you for the concern Naruto-san, you're such a nice young boy. Naruto smiled at her as he offered his hand to help her up. Are you sure, Tsunami-san? You can never be too careful. The woman just smiled at him, as if to dissuade his concerns. I'm fine now, Naruto, now let's go back to the house. I'm sure my family and your team are worried about us. She began to walk off, missing Naruto's much less innocent smile as he followed after her. Of course. Haku and Zabuza quickly sped through the trees on their way out of Nami no Kuni, only briefly stopping when they needed to get some water. As they did so, Haku noticed Zabuza still wore a grin underneath his face wrap. Naruto-san was interesting, wasn't he? Haku offered, to break the strange silence that had come over them since leaving. Yeah, interesting Gaki alright, especially for a Konoha brat. I was surprised he came so close to actually beating you. Haku smiled at Zabuza's gruff assertion as he pulled up his sleeve slightly, revealing a small scratch down his forearm. Actually, I believe if Naruto-san were taking me more seriously, the outcome would have been very different. It had taken a lot for Haku to fight despite his arm being partially numbed. Zabuza took one look at the small wound that would have been easily enough for a lethal poison to get into Haku's system before laughing loudly, looking down at the small note Naruto had slipped him in their handshake. Like I said, Haku, interesting kid. A young, mousy-haired man cautiously walked into the old warehouse on the edge of town that had been abandoned shortly after Gato took over the nation. He breathed a sigh of relief as he spotted others already there, milling about and quietly talking amongst themselves. From the number of people there he could only assume he was one of the last to arrive, and was proven right shortly after. The previously darkened and dimly lit warehouse suddenly erupted in light as somebody turned the power on. Most people winced at the sudden change, but those that had only just arrived, whose eyes hadn't adjusted, gasped at what they saw. Suspended from the ceiling of the massive building was none other than Gato, his arms held out to either side by the wires supporting him. The man was obviously still alive, but his previously nice and well-tailored clothing was torn and dirtied, his face bruised and bloodied. When everybody else realized what they were seeing, the entire warehouse erupted into excited and shocked chatter as people tried to work out what was going on and just who had done this. Do you like my present? Abruptly, all the conversations died as a loud but casual voice spoke up over all of them. It was quickly revealed to belong to a hooded individual sitting in a darker corner of the warehouse, his features mostly shrouded by the gloom. What is this? A braver resident of the nation called out to the shrouded figure, only to have him cock his head slightly. Like I said, it is my present to the people of Nami no Kuni. Gato, of Gato Shipping and Transport, delivered to you so that you can see justice done. The warehouse erupted into whispers and voices again, and the figure seemed perfectly content to allow him to continue until the same man called out again. We were told Gato left the country. The figure in the darkness just smiled, his white teeth visible even in the darkened corner. And yet he's right here, above you all, how curious. The man seemed to fall quiet at that, as none of the collected people seemed to have anything to say. They were all only here because of notes subtly distributed around the village, telling them that if they came here at this time they would be rewarded. Is this the change? A woman spoke up from near the back of the hall, holding up a small white note most of the assembled recognized. The figure smiled again, nodding once in confirmation. That was you. Another voice, and another nod to answer him before silence descended again and the figure finally deigned to speak. This is a turning point for your nation. As I see it, there are a few directions you could take your newfound freedom, none of which are easy. There were a few more whispers at that, but they quietened down quickly as the figure raised a hand. He had already earned their undivided attention. You could try and build your nation up to what it once was, but with the financial instability created under Gato's regime it would be difficult. Eventually you would need loans from a larger nation, and suddenly you would be placing yourself under a different kind of slavery, one of debt. Again, the crowd broke out in nervous chatter and the man simply waited for them to quieten. You could also try to seize Gato's assets, try and live your way through that, he continued patiently, although I assure you, the man was quite brilliant in hiding what he owned. You wouldn't get far. This time there was silence and the figure smiled. Thirdly, you could abandon Nami, try to make a life for yourself elsewhere. With the completion of Tazuna's bridge this will become a real possibility. Personally though, I see this as the coward's way out. Finally, somebody in the crowd was brave enough to speak out in a frustrated tone. Then what would you suggest? The Cheshire-like grin hidden in the shadows only grew as the figure suddenly stepped out into the light, hood still drawn so they couldn't see his face. However, many instantly recognized from his height that he couldn't be all that old. I'm glad you asked. I know the way to return Nami to its original glory without you ever once having to ask for the support of another nation. As long as you agree to give me a 0.1% share of the nation's earnings, a trifling amount, I can give you this knowledge. The people looked amongst themselves nervously. This suddenly felt like making a deal with the devil. They were a nation of fishermen and farmers though, and anybody who was a threat to Gato had already been killed off, leaving nobody qualified to lead the nation. You're just a kid. The figure didn't see who called out, but he seemed unconcerned by it nevertheless. A kid that currently owns majority share in Gato's shipping and transport. It would be simple enough to dilute my stock amongst the nation, giving you all the money you needed to rebuild. That seemed to quieten the man, only for another to speak up. If you have that, why give it to us for so little in return? In truth, 0.1% of their entire country's earnings was hardly a small amount, but it paled in comparison to a company like Gato's. Because, admittedly, there is something else I want in return. Information. Nami will quickly become a hub of shipping lanes and trade lines. A lot of information will pass through here. He smiled serenely as he leaned against a large, long-abandoned crate. And that is all I ask. Nami no Kuni will be back to its former strength within a year. Guaranteed. They looked uncertain and spoke in hushed, nervous whispers, but the figure already knew what the decision would be. His cards were on the table and they had seen the choices. It had already happened, they just didn't know it yet. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.